Shefty, obviously, it seems like every time you're on, obviously, we're talking about Brandon Aiyuk out in San Francisco. You may be fielding some texts about Aiyuk right now. Is there what's the latest developments with him, and where do you see this thing ending up?
Well, they were off yesterday, so there was no practice in the building. No players were not there. Today they go back, and we are now under 3 weeks away from the regular season opener to where the 49ers are hosting the New York Jets. Now, the 49ers know that they need Brandon Aiyuk out there. He's made a lot of plays for them over time. He has had a great run, and they want to get the deal done. They've made him multiple offers to try to keep him. But for whatever reason, that deal hasn't gotten done, and that has allowed other teams to enter the fray with trade conversations. And so I think we're at the point now where we're going to start to get a push here to see how this winds up, how it's resolved. And I think the 49ers would like to keep him, want to keep him. I still think that's the more likely scenario, but to think that there's any likely scenario in this particular situation would be a mistake, because there was a time when I thought, okay, it sounds like he's going to be traded to Cleveland. And then there was a time where I thought, well, it sounds like he's going to be traded to New England. And then there was a time I thought, okay, he's going to be traded to Pittsburgh. And then I thought there was a time he's re-signing with San Francisco. And here we are on, 20th. Tuesday, August 20th, and nothing is still done. Nothing. And I just think that everybody is at the point where they know they need to get resolution, whatever that is, right? So they're running out of time, because if he's going to be playing opening weekend, which you would think he would be, whether that's in San Francisco or Pittsburgh or Cleveland or wherever, it's time to get back on the practice field, and it's time to start gearing up for the opener wherever you're going to play. And then there's the business at hand. If he's going back on the practice field, why would you go back on the practice field to get ready for an opener if your deal's not getting done wherever that is, whether that's in San Francisco or you agreeing to a trade to another place? So I just think we're entering here a important time for Brandon Aiyuk, where I think at some point this week there'll be activity here, and we'll see what that leads to.
Okay, some sort of activity. I like that, because there's been a lot of activity, and then there was some fugazi activity seemingly from it all. And you just said that, you feel like the most likely at this particular point is for him to go back to the Niners. Is it as, I don't want to say volatile, because that seemingly has a negative connotation. Is it as random of an outcome right now as it has been over the last couple of weeks on what the hell happens here?
I think it is, Pat. Like I said to you, I said that. No. I said to you today that I think that that's the most likely outcome. But I'm just telling you, at various points, I would have thought the most likely outcome would have been him being traded to Cleveland or to Pittsburgh or New England.
Wow.
And so the most likely outcomes shift on an almost daily basis. How this unfolds in the end, we're all waiting to see. Again, today, the outcome that makes sense, whatever that means, is going back to San Francisco. But there's a lot of things that don't make sense here, so it's hard to predict exactly how it's going to go. Here's what we do know. I think he would like to be in San Francisco. We know he wants to be paid.
Okay.
And we know the 49ers want to keep him. So if all that is there,
come on a wedding day, there had to be a little.
All the elements are there. It shouldn't be that hard. It shouldn't be that hard to get to the point where you figure out what it's going to take to get it across the finish line, get the guy under contract. Here you see the top-paid wide receivers heading into the season, the average annual salary. It's not hard to slot him in here, right? Like I would think somewhere between Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill, right in that range. 30, 28, 29, whatever that number is, it's going to be right in there. And get the deal done, wherever it is. Re-sign in San Francisco or agree to move on. But we're under 3 weeks, and it's time to figure it out, because you got to practice, and I don't think you want to step onto the practice field without a new contract.
Yeah, and, wide receiver and quarterback relationships are obviously a massive ordeal, and The sooner we see him back on a football field, we'll all be happy because we think he's a dog as a player. And there's a lot of fan bases that want him. If he goes back to San Fran, signs a deal, the locker room will be very pumped to have him back. Fans will be pumped to have him back. If he signs somewhere else, fans will be pumped to have him. It's a win-win, but let's get to it, is what Schefter is seemingly saying. We agree on a lot of these things here. What separates us is much smaller than what brings us together here, team.
Sure.
We put our swords aside for just a matter of moments. You want to be here, we want you here. You want money, we want to give you money. Let's figure this whole thing out. We'll be able to.
Not hard.
So let's talk about the Trent Williams situation, because that might make it a little bit harder, right? Because they don't know how much they're going to have to allot to him. So they don't know how much money they have to potentially give to Aiyuk, or are these two separate operations? And I know, like, offensive line, and especially with Trent, and I'll quote Robert Saleh when he was talking about Hassan Reddick. We know that Trent's working hard. We know that Trent has been a very good football player for a long time.
Pros pro.
We know he's pros pro. We know he'll be ready whenever he comes back here, which is what Coach Saleh said about Hassan Reddick before the mandatory OTAs, which he was unexcused, also known as inexcused for, alongside Aaron Rodgers. Now Hassan Reddick went out. But with Trent, we know he's going to be in shape. We know even if Trent wasn't in shape, he'd probably still be top tackle in the entire NFL. Not as much worry because he's an offensive lineman, or what are you hearing here, and how does one affect the other?
Well, I think one does affect the other, because I think the 49ers have been consumed with trying to resolve the Brandon Aiyuk situation. And with all the manpower, brain power, time, and resources that have been allocated to figuring out the Brandon Aiyuk situation, I almost feel like Trent Williams, in this particular case, everybody feels like they'll figure out a way to get this done when they need to. He's a 36-year-old guy. I mean, again, I think we're at a point now where you want to start getting everybody back into camp. And it's one more reason to get the Aiyuk situation resolved, so they could then devote their time and energy to figuring out the Trent Williams situation. But you got to get Aiyuk done first, and then they can go on to Trent Williams. I mean, I guess you can go sign Trent Williams first if this goes on. You have to get that done anyway, but it just feels like their time and energy has been spent on one player.
What did we learn there about the Aiyuk situation? Sounds like?
Sounds like he's
I have no idea. Everything is on the table.
But
still.
he acts like by the end of this week, Schefter acts as kind of a deadline, I guess.
He said there was a time where I thought the most likely outcome was he was going to be a Cleveland Brown. There was a time where I thought the most likely outcome was that he was going to be a New England Patriot. There was a time where I thought the most likely outcome was he was going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. There was a time now today that I think he's most likely to be re-signed with the San Francisco 49ers. Then he talked about practice. He brought up practice pretty good, but need to start practicing. It's like, who's telling him that information now? Is that the Aiyuk folks being like he would like to get on a field in practice, or is that the teams? And he said everybody is saying this. So is that multiple teams being like, whatever ends up happening, we just would like to get him on a field ASAP? I'm kind of intrigued how that plays out. Then the Trent Williams deal, hinging upon that, because they're exhausting all their resources, which I've heard is a thing that people say in the Aiyuk situation, and then now they can't do anything with Trent. It's like, what a wild time for them. And then I'm not going to judge preseason Brock Purdy, because I've seen regular season Brock Purdy and playoff Brock Purdy. But preseason Brock Purdy this past weekend, with no CMC, no Debo, no Kittle, no Trent, obviously no Aiyuk. So basically nobody on the offensive side. And they still had him playing, which, certainly interesting. It wasn't great. No. Like, there was a couple things that happened during the game where you're like, that's not Brock Purdy football. Like, even something as small as he stepped out of bounds 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage when he could have just easily did that, and he takes a sack for a 2-yard loss. It's like, that's not Brock Purdy football.
He threw a ball up in a crowd of like 3 people, and now it was incomplete. It fell incomplete, but it wasn't Brock Purdy.
That's not Brock Purdy football. And then you're like, oh no, it's Brock Purdy. And then you look at everybody on the sideline. You're like, why is Brock Purdy playing in this game?
Yeah, what the hell is going on?
What have you got Brock Purdy? And that's because he's so jacked right now. They wanted to make sure everybody could feel it, AJ. But this San Francisco 49ers situation continuing to linger much longer than I thought it would.
Well, the Aiyuk situation, I don't understand. I just wonder how much dialogue there is back and forth between everybody. And also with these things happen, like, when it happens, boom, it just happens. One person can make a decision and either give them what they want. Aiyuk could all of a sudden say, this is good, I'm going to sign. You never know. Schefter, I guess we know Schefter, though. He has his finger on the pulse, especially San Fran.
Yeah, seemingly everywhere, but definitely through the past. San Fran.